Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm David Pendergrass. If you have not already, I really encourage you to go back and listen to Introduction to Revelation on my podcast. Let's pick up where we left off last time, and this will be part 2 and the final part of the Introduction to Revelation. And so far what we're discussing is the role and understanding of apocalyptic literature. Week 1 was about apocalyptic literature in general in Judaism and Christianity. This week, I want to talk more particularly about some particular and very common and well-known apocalyptic texts, one from Jesus and one from Paul. One thing I'm doing the best job I can on these podcasts is taking out a lot of the babies talking in the background and crying and laughing and so forth, and you'll have some of that in there, but I think you can still understand me. Here we go. If you don't know this, I record this and I have a podcast, and if you want, you can listen to these anytime you want. And something I noticed about my podcast from last week, particularly because the microphone was a little bit farther away, is that I talk sometimes too quickly for the microphone to pick it up at a distance. So, my bad. This week will be different. From thenceforth will be different to make sure. So what we'll do is, just a quick review. If you have features of apocalyptic literature in front of you, I want to pick up there a little bit. And we will cover some stuff tonight that will get us up to Revelation. And my hope is by the end of tonight to go into Revelation a little bit. But before we do that, some of these other quote-unquote not bigger, but other issues that are often raised, let's cover them first. Okay, let's do that first. Before I do that, are there any questions or comments for me? Anything at all about what we covered last week? Okay. In general, remember, apocalyptic literature is a kind of literature, it's a genre, and we call it apocalyptic, and I'll talk about this later on too, but because the book of Revelation, apocalypsis in Greek means to be revealed, or revelation. So we call it apocalyptic. Apocalypse is Greek, revealed literature. The documents themselves don't say, we're apocalyptic literature. It doesn't on the front like a cookbook might say, Noel's cookbook. In the ancient world, they didn't do it that way. But scholars then give them labels for that. Okay, and that's why we're talking about apocalyptic literature, because Revelation fits into it. And remember, apocalyptic literature is a narrative. It's a narrative where a person either receives a vision or goes on a journey, sometimes a little both, and it's otherworldly, and it's just otherworldly, and it sounds a bit crazy. It uses heavy symbolism. It uses numbers, metaphors, similes galore, and in general, you want to trust how the image makes you feel, what it evokes, more than you want to draw a picture about it and make a chronological timetable. In general.
How does that make you feel?
That's right. This is very good. This is the one time it's okay to say, how does it make you feel? That's exactly right. She's heard me say many times back with D groups, you don't ask how do you think Mary felt when she had the angel come to her? Don't ask. It's a dumb question. In apocalyptic literature, it's a really good question. And that's the main thing. So it's a kind of literature. Just to remind you, get the pumps primed a little bit. I gave the analogy of a cookbook, how if I go there, I read it differently. So I say 350 degrees is not up for grabs. It's just 350 degrees. I don't care what you think about it. Apocalyptic literature is more like poetry, where to ask the question, exactly what kind of butterfly is it in the butterfly in your stomach, you've missed the point. It doesn't mean you don't love Jesus. It doesn't mean you don't love poetry. It doesn't mean you don't love butterflies. It means you don't understand the genre of poetry. That's all. That's all it means. And Revelation fits in that category very well. Then the question is, Noel, then what is it trying to evoke? That's the good question. That's the perfect question. What's it trying to evoke? If I read good poetry and it felt like butterflies in my stomach, what am I trying to ask? What did it feel like? What am I trying to evoke? Nervousness, anxiety, tickles in my stomach. That's good. And therein lies, stay with me, therein lies one of the chief problems in interpreting apocalyptic literature. You will hear me say over and over when we get to Revelation, what that means is, or what they're trying to evoke is, and that means it robs it of the force it's trying to invoke. If every single time you read poetry and Susie said, Leonard, it makes the butterflies just tickle my stomach, and I go, okay, what does that mean? Well, that's a metaphor, an image for when I get excited. Oh, okay. It's not romantic anymore. It's dissecting the butterfly okay, that's a butterfly, dissect the frog. It's a weird thing. My wife asks me all the time when I'm watching a movie, what's funny about that? If I have to explain it, Shit, well, is that funny? It's funny to me. Well, I'm laughing. Ha, ha, ha. What's funny about that? He said it's not. By the time I explain it, it's dissecting. It's dead. It's broken. Jokes punch when you don't have to explain it, and that's the problem with apocalyptic literature because it's 2,000 years ago. It's a dead genre, and you and I are not steeped in Jewish apocalyptic imagery. So I always have to keep saying, back then that would have meant this. Back then it would have meant this. It's just like dissecting the joke, dissecting the metaphor in the poetry. Nevertheless, that's the way it is. It's just like parables, by the way. Every single time I've ever taught or I preach on the parables, and Jesus' point is, do it and I dissect it. That's not what the first person heard it in Judaism. First century person didn't hear it that way. It punched him in the jugular right away because they already knew the assumptions. Okay, I'll say more about that later on, but not right now. Okay, let's talk a little bit about eschatology. Eschatology, then we're going to look at some biblical text. If you can look at page 4, and I'm not going to read all of this, I just need to introduce this concept. Features of apocalyptic literature, page 4, it says 2 major forms of eschatology. 2 major forms. Eschatology means what? The study of end times, very good. Or you might say last things. That literally is what it means, the last end time. We can say end times, that's fine. Now sometimes, stay with me here, okay? In the middle of page 4, you can do individual versus corporate eschatology. That is, what happens to the individual or what happens to the group of people. That's one way scholars like to talk about end times or last things. I'm looking around the middle of page 4 here. Sometimes they say it's realized versus inaugurated. Realized means it's here right now. The end times are already happening. Inaugurated means it's begun. You might also say future. That's one way scholars like to talk about it. Those are different ways to use the terms. The way I'm going to talk about right now is I'm going to emphasize another way to think about end times. The way the prophets like to talk about it and apocalyptic authors like to talk about it. And they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. Prophetic eschatology is not a clever title. It's a normal title. It's basically what the prophets did. Now, what's a prophet? Someone who speaks on behalf of God. So Isaiah, Amos, Hosea, Jeremiah. So the prophets, when they talked about end times, look here are the features. You with me? Okay, so this is the features right on page 4. I'm right in the middle here. I'm just going to read some of these. When the prophets, that is biblical prophets. Now, how do I know this? How do any scholar know it? Because they just read it very carefully. You can do the same thing. So you don't need a special decoder ring for this. Is you read very carefully. When the prophets talk about the last things, these are the dominant features. Number 1, it's of the prophets. B, it's typically concerned with their current events. That is to say, let that sink in. When Isaiah spoke to his people, Jeremiah spoke to his people, they were not trying to challenge or comfort people 2,000 years later. They're trying to challenge and comfort people who are listening right then and there. Letter C, they typically spoke to nation or people groups, not countries. And this is always misunderstood in modern understanding of eschatology, particularly because of dispensationalism. They think he's primarily concerned with countries like the U.S. or Russia. That's not the point of the prophets. It's people groups. D, salvation comes from God at the Yom Adonai. Yom is day. Adonai means my Lord. So day of, literally day of my Lord. But that is a technical term for when God judges people. And so the prophets think at the Yom Adonai, these imminent events, God's going to do something about it. And salvation, when they use those concepts to be saved by Yahweh, it almost entirely is something that involves economic, social, or political salvation. That is to say, in general, when Jews use the concept of salvation, they did not think it meant spiritual salvation. The reason why is because Jews already thought they were, in that sense, saved. They have a covenant with God. They don't need to talk about it. But they did feel oppressed, sometimes beaten by the nations. I mean, literally beaten. The militaries were decimated. The city might be decimated, or they might be sent into exile. And salvation typically was on earth. It was not in a world to come. It wasn't in heaven. They expected a messianic figure to be in Jerusalem. And the last letter F is really important. They held what we call a positive anthropology. Positive anthropology. That is a view that basically humans can stop when they want to doing the wrong thing. So just say stop doing it and you'll stop. It's a positive view. Let that sink in. It's a positive view of what a human can do when he or she is told to stop their behavior. Or not even to stop their behavior, but just a positive view of what they can, their choices. We call that a positive view, anthropology for the view of man. So I did a little picture here, and it's very fancy. Present age, then boom, there's a day of the Lord, and this messianic kingdom on earth. Now, there's a lot more there, but I'm not going to go into it. But let me say very briefly, not all Jews believed the Messiah is going to come back. The ones that didn't all have the same view. Some believed in several messiahs, some believed in one Messiah. But in general, those that did believe in a Messiah believed the Messiah would be a political military figure who would help lead the Jewish armies to defeat the bad guys, then establish a Davidic king, God-centered kingdom at Jerusalem, at the Temple Mount. Okay.
This is basically what has happened on earth.
That's exactly right. That's why most Jews to this day don't think Jesus is the Messiah, because that hasn't happened yet. They'll say when he, and it's the common, there's a little anecdotal joke, and I've heard in scholarship a good bit, when Jews will say, when Jesus returns, the Jews are going to say, the Messiah has come. The Christians are going to say, he's come back. Now, of course, from a Christian perspective, we know he's come for what he's done via the Spirit, and that's what the early Christians believe. Okay, very good. In general, that's prophetic eschatology. Apocalyptic authors did not think about last things the same way. You need to understand that, let that sink in. I'm telling you because when you read the New Testament, apocalyptic sections like Mark 13, all of a sudden just sound so different. The images sound different, and their understanding of the world is different. The New Testament in general holds an apocalyptic worldview. And most scholars around the world for a long time have called Jesus, historians we would call him, an apocalyptic prophet. It's a very common appellation of Jesus of Nazareth, an apocalyptic prophet. That means to say he believes he would hold to these themes I'm going to leave here. So bottom of page 4, this is the dominant view of apocalypses and apocalyptic narratives. And I give all these references, Daniel 7 to 12, that's in the Old Testament, of course, Mark 13, 1 Thessalonians, and so forth. And we're going to read some of them here in just a little bit. Typically concerned with future events, but not necessarily distant future, but just hasn't happened yet. Third, typically concern all peoples. That is, instead of thinking of what's going to happen to Jews, it's cosmic in scale. For them, cosmic means the whole earth. They don't have the notion of a universe, but cosmic for them is everybody. And letter D, I'm skimming quickly. D, it is Yom Adonai, that's the day of judgment, but now the Christians join that with Jesus' return. And you need to know that I hope every Christian memorizes this term. The Greek word, about half of the time used for the return of Jesus, is parousia, and I have that in the document right here, parousia, and it means arrival or coming. That's a word. The other word they use Paul uses several times in the New Testament for the return of Jesus is the revealing. This is all through, particularly in Colossians and Ephesians. At his revealing, the saints will be told, at his revealing. Now listen, I want that to sink in for a second, because it is not the picture that Jesus is past Pluto. Oh, a satellite picked up Jesus on his back return. Here, he's past Saturn. Here he comes. Oh, there you go. That's not, in New Testament, there's no notion of a distant Pluto. They don't have that concept of a galaxy. So to be revealed means all of a sudden, as if right now he burst through reality in this room. You're going to unzip reality, and boom, there he is. He's right here. And that's because the Christian view is not that Jesus went way out somewhere, millions of kilometers away. The Christian view is that the kingdom of God, the realm of God, is right in our midst. We don't have immediate access to it. In our physical selves, we have access to it via our soul and via the Spirit's help. It's much like saying right now, if I ask Jacob, how does it feel to have radio signals going through your body right now? Do you feel it, Jacob? What do you mean you don't feel it, Jacob? Therefore, you don't think it exists? If we debated about this, I would have to argue for it. I have to demonstrate. And one way I could do that is by turning on a radio, putting up antennas, now, Jacob, what do you think the most probable explanation for why that radio is now working? What if I told you there's a mysterious magical thing called a radio and it's sending out signals and the antennas are picking it up? Imagine that. You can't see them. Your body has no sensation. In a similar way, the Christian worldview is that the kingdom of God is like that. We don't have immediate access like that in a sense, our body. But there's a part of us, the soul spirit, that it can get in tune with it. And so Jesus is not distant. He's right in the midst. We don't see him. Yes, ma'am, please.
Well,
Did you give handouts to
me?
me?
We read in the scripture, the kingdom is at hand.
The kingdom is at hand.
The kingdom has drawn near.
The kingdom of God is at hand in Mark 1:14-15. Maybe even a better one is when Jesus says the kingdom of God has come upon you or is in you. Yeah. That's exactly right. God's reign is now here. Okay. That's right. Jews believe heaven and earthly realms intersected.
That's right.
But the way to have visible notion of him or that kind of feeling would be in a temple. And of course, Christians believe when you see Jesus, you see a walking temple. Heaven and earth have coincided. And N.T. Wright, I think, he's really helped me on that point. He's really right. They've intersected there. So, parousia is his coming, his return. Let that sink in. The word for Jesus' return is not rapture. It is parousia. That's the Greek word. Now you know Greek. Good for you. And what the Christians did was they joined prophetic eschatology, Yom Adonai. Go read Amos. You'll see Yom Adonai several times. At the day of the Lord, there will be weeping, not celebrating. Well, the average Jew thought they're going to be, woohoo, we're the good guys. And Amos is talking to the Jews. You're going to be stinking sad it happens. You don't ask for judgment. It's coming to you. Don't ask for Yom Adonai, day of the Lord. And then Christians took the same concept and said, when you see Jesus, that is Yom Adonai. It's the same thing. Now, I told you last week that I'm not going to pick on dispensationalist theology much. I said sometimes I have to, and I have to now, because they separate these events. Remember last week? It's in your handout. They radically separate rapture from his return. That is not a New Testament concept. It's not, and I'm going to prove it to you in a little bit from the text. Last thing, salvation is about, you might say, the cosmos. Everyone is affected by it, not just Jews. And last, and this is really important, apocalyptic eschatology, it has a stinking negative anthropology. Humans cannot. They cannot change if they just wanted to. And that's why on your little next page, I have a little picture, and I call it the present evil age. PEA. It's not a present age, a present evil age. Do you see at the top of page 5? And that's the way we're in. So an apocalyptic version of reality, let that stick in there for a second. If an apocalyptic author wants to talk about how bad things are these days, like your old grandma and grandpa, boy, in my day, it was a lot better, but boy, now everyone's corrupt. And that's an apocalyptic thought, that it's all gone to blank in a handbasket. That's apocalyptic worldview. And then there's going to be the day of the Lord, the parousia, and then a new age to come. Because he can't just go to Jerusalem and say, okay, this will work. No, because everyone's so stinking corrupt. He's got to start over with the new heavens and new earth. And he gets that from Isaiah 65, and Revelation 21, he copies it and says, and I saw a new heavens and new earth. That's apocalyptic. It's new. It's new. It's got to be new. You don't just give him a bath. It's going to be a bath with new. But they're related. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, it's like having a baby. So the baby's related to the mama, but they're not the same. And that's the best we get as a metaphor. Okay, and I'm going to stop right there. And this temporary messianic kingdom, I'm going to come back. So hold on to that. Toward the end of Revelation, I'm going to come back to that if you remember this. What question or comments do you have about anything, but certainly about these two major understandings of how to think about last things, prophetic eschatology and apocalyptic eschatology? What questions or comments do you have about that? How was it revealed to the Christians?
They were used to this old way of thinking.
Oh, that's good. What maybe changed their mind? That I would say probably two major reasons where this kind of, you might say, comes from. One is it comes from a development within Judaism, because apocalyptic eschatology begins, particularly, a favorite place to go to. I mean, if we have we have time, but I'm choosing not to. If we really want it, if this were a seminary class, we'd read all through Daniel 7:12, Ezekiel 38. We would see what we call you go back to page, is it page 1? Do you see back on Roman numeral 3, it says literature. Under Old Testament, I have Ezekiel 40 and Zechariah. I have proto-apocalyptic. Of course, proto means an early form of it, and that's what scholars call it. So it started in Judaism. Certainly by the time we get to Daniel 7 through 12, which most scholars on the planet think was written around 165 BC. So roughly 150 years before Jesus is born, it's already begun within Judaism to make this apocalyptic. And the Essenes also had a similar thing about the same time period. So my first answer is Jews themselves started thinking this way. And it might have been just their logical response of looking around and saying, man, it's not getting better. They're sunk. Gentiles are sunk. God's got to do something brand new. You might suggest they were inspired to think that way. Fine, I'm fine. But whatever it is, it happened. So one is, I think, Jews themselves, there was already a movement. Secondly, it sure seems to be the case that Jesus himself spoke this way. And because he seems to very much agree with this apocalyptic worldview, that it's probably where the earliest disciples get it. Having said that, not every gospel author presents Jesus as heavily apocalyptic. It's just not true to say that's who he was. But I think chiefly that's true. Chiefly, he believed that the kingdom of God was bursting in with him. It was being revealed. And that, in that sense, absolutely he was apocalyptic. But it doesn't mean everything he taught was apocalyptic. Jesus, for example, and I'll move on unless you have more questions. When Jesus taught in the Gospels, we have no indication, very little to no indication that Jesus believed that a person could not repent if they just wanted to. It's assumed throughout the text when he says, stop doing it, or be repenting, put your faith in the gospel. Mark 1:14-15, the summary. We have no indication that he goes, never mind, what am I thinking? You're all corrupt. You need to be regenerated first. That's what Calvinists believe. You've got to be regenerated first before you can respond. Jesus is not a Calvinist. He speaks to people and assumes they'll stop. Now you might assume, well, that's only if the Spirit works. Well, maybe. It's just the text doesn't say that. So, but a true apocalyptic author assumes they're sunk, typically. And Jesus doesn't seem to think, he thinks they're sunk, but not such a negative anthropology, if that makes sense. So he doesn't fit perfectly a mold, but in the sense of apocalyptic of the world to come is now breaking in upon you, that's straight up grade A apocalyptic. And there's several other texts that would demonstrate that. So to answer your question, 1, I think Judaism started it. 2, I think Jesus helped as well. That's good. That's the best I got. And if we need to slow down here, we can. If not, I'll just move ahead. And that's okay. And even next week, or email me, call me. Some people have a real emotional, psychological difficulty with this, because it means when they read their Bible, some authors have one view, some others have a different view. But I'm saying is, I didn't write the Bible, the 66 books alone in the Protestant canon, and that's just what we have. The truth is, and I care about truth a lot. I'm sure we all care about truth. The truth is, when the prophets spoke about last things, I've seen several estimates from really good scholars, roughly 1%, roughly 1 to 2% are about distant future events. That means 98 to 99% of the time when a prophet speaks about something that's about to happen, they mean right around the corner, tomorrow, next week, next month, or by the afternoon or something. But apocalyptic literature has a very different view. They do care about current events, but they can cast current events and make it even a little more distant, a little more cosmic. So they're different views, and they go together. And that's, can I say this one quick footnote? And I keep saying it, I'm not picking on preachers, but I am one, so I can say this. This is why it's important, and I know it might be daunting, but when you hear preachers go back and forth between a Revelation and Isaiah and Ezekiel, and they go back and forth over and over because a word sounds the same, it's some scary business. Because they've not always let the audience know they've switched between very different worldviews. Now, having said that, it is very true that apocalyptic authors borrow so much from the Old Testament. They do. And if you really want to study Revelation really thoroughly, you need to go read all of Ezekiel, all these texts I say, Isaiah and Daniel and Zechariah, then read Revelation and go, oh, he's borrowing that image. Sure. He borrows the image, but then he will recast them in a different way. He borrows the image or the metaphor and then recast it. If I used all the furniture in this room and say, I'm going to borrow this furniture, I'm going to take it to my house, but I'm going to do very different things with it. I'm going to use it as a kitchen table. That's going to sleep on that as a bed. I would rearrange it. That's kind of what they rearrange the furniture. Any questions or comments? We'll move on. Okay. To save time, we're not going to read through Daniel 7, but let's pick up, if we can, in Matthew chapter 24. Turn your Bibles to Matthew 24. Virtually every New Testament scholar in the world concurs with this view. Mark was written first, then Matthew, then Luke, then John. Now, that doesn't mean it's certain. I'm certain that's the case. John, I'm not sure if John was written last. I tend to think John was earlier. But anyway, Matthew and Luke do use Mark. In fact, over 93% of Mark shows up in Matthew and in Luke. So you have Matthew and Luke who copies wholesale big chunks of Mark. And then they have some uniquely Matthean material. We call that M in scholarship. That only shows up in Matthew. And then Luke has a whole bunch of Mark and some of Matthew and uniquely Lucan stuff. For example, in Luke 15, the prodigal son, which is a horrible name for that parable, but you know that by that name, that's uniquely Lucan. It shows up nowhere else in the Bible. So you have Mark, then Matthew, then Luke, and Matthew and Luke add their independent stuff. John's just an odd bird. A couple times he coincides, otherwise on his own. In Mark 13, we have what's called the Olivet Discourse. Now, let me remind you, Jesus goes to Jerusalem in Mark's text for the last time, and Mark's text is really the first time, but anyway, he goes to Jerusalem, and he condemns the temple. He overturns the tables. They don't really like that. They try to kill him. He goes and have, what is probably a Passover feast. He goes right to Jerusalem. I'm using my hand here. It's up high, Jerusalem up high. He walks down probably the Kidron Valley or something like it, and goes right up the other side to the Mount of Olives. You can go there today. I've been there. There's a hotel right there with a bunch of arches, and you can see it. I mean, so he went with his disciples right there and sat down and chilled out for a little bit after a Passover meal. And when they're sitting there, they've been drinking some wine, because you drink a lot of wine at the Passover meal, Chris. Can you believe that? And it says they sang some songs. That's normal. And they start chilling. And they're looking at Jerusalem and this big temple, the most beautiful it had ever been. And they coated in whitewash as white, even at night with the street torches, it would have glowed a little bit. And they start chatting. And Jesus says, man, you see that temple? It's not going to last. And all the disciples go, whoo, let's hear it. I mean, it's the original E-News. They can't wait to find out, not what Kim Kardashian's wearing, thank you, Susie, but what's going to happen, because this is crazy to think the temple surely is not going to fall, Jesus. You've gone crazy. Okay, stay with me. And then he tells them a story, and the disciples say, when is this going to happen? How do we know it's going to happen? And in his story, in his answer, Jesus, never tells them. He never tells them when it's going to happen, which is ironic, footnote, because that's how everyone uses the text. I'll tell you what, Jesus himself will say, I don't know, Son of Man doesn't know. That A, he doesn't tell him. B, he does something that's a little confusing. He intertwines two different things. Probably he does intertwines. The destruction of the temple and end times. Now, people like N.T. Wright say these are the same thing. He doesn't mean end times at all. He only means the destruction of the temple. And that's certainly possible. But okay, I'm almost done, and we're reading Matthew 24. In Mark 13, Matthew 24 uses Mark 13, but Matthew adds some other Matthew stuff. So Matthew 24 comes from Mark 13, but he adds some uniquely Matthean material. Now, then the question is, I know you're asking this, Shauna, in your mind. Well, David, does that mean Matthew made it up? Or does that mean Mark just didn't record what Jesus said? You got to make up your own mind. I don't know. I don't care that much. But he adds some stuff Jesus doesn't say in Mark 13, which is fine. I tend to think he said it, but whatever. In Matthew 24, I'm reading Matthew 24, Jason, if you're wondering why I read Matthew 24.
Why are you reading Matthew?
Why am I reading Matthew 24? Because it seems to be the case, I'm leading you somewhere if you can believe this. Instead of starting with Paul, where I want to go, and go backwards, I'm going to start in the backward and go forward. When we get to Paul, it seems to be the case in 1 Thessalonians that Paul is referring to a Jesus tradition, and the closest the verbiage comes to is, guess what? Matthew 24. So I'm taking you somewhere, so stay with me, a journey. Matthew 24, look at verse 1. I'm not going to really unpack all this because of time, but Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. They're like, look at that, wow. But he answered them, you see all these? Do you not? Surely I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Now, that's amazing. Jewish fervor was at an all-time high, because when the temple gets rebuilt, there's going to be a king like David. It's going to be awesome. Woohoo! As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, which means there's a bunch of other people with him, but his personal disciples come up and say, hey, Jesus, come on, you're talking. Tell me more about that. We want to be on the inside scoop. It's theological gossip. Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. Now that's a particular Matthean there. But anyway, and Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I'm the Messiah, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. Now, so far, this is fairly standard Jewish apocalyptic imagery of wars and rumors of wars. We'll see this in Revelation. So Jesus is saying, chill out. When you see that, it's not the end yet. Don't go to the wrong leaders. Verse 7, for nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. That's the same point. And there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. That's standard apocalyptic imagery. Famines and earthquakes equals cosmos is coming unraveled. That's standard. You'll see that in Revelation, verse 8. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. That's standard, I'm going to keep saying this, Jewish apocalyptic. Can I pause here for a second? I'm going to say this when we get to Revelation. The assumption is when you look out in the world and you hear about these wars and rumors of wars, we might say, and all these drug cartels and El Chapo and this and all the bad things going on, why is it taking place? The apocalyptic author's answer is, I tell you exactly why this is happening. It's the sign that the shift of the ages is happening. It's the sign that the shift of the ages is happening. Now, if you'll go back to your handout on page 5, at the top of page 5, if you got a little pen or pencil or crayon or whatever, I was teaching a class one time. I substitute taught for these 5th graders, and I said what I just said, pen, prints, crayon, or blood. It doesn't matter. This little kid had just cut his finger and literally used his blood to grade his paper. I said, what are you doing? 6th grade. He goes, but you said use it. I said, I was teasing. Don't smear blood on your paper. It's a little bit. Later on, he goes, I need to go home. I'm lightheaded. He had a little bitty baby cut on his. So use your blood if you want, your tongue, whatever. Where it says present evil age, if you drew a squiggly line, squiggle, 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 big, boom, like it got worse and worse and worse. If you drew a little squiggle line got worse and worse and worse, that's an image, in my mind at least, of how bad things are getting. If you were an apocalyptic author, that squiggly line would sound like this. It sounds like famines and wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes. And then it gets worse and worse. And then you'll see in Revelation and also in Matthew 24, then the stars fall down. Then the moon turns to blood. It gets worse and worse because that's apocalyptic imagery. And here we go right here. Boom, 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 boom. There's my squiggle lines. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And this whole thing, if I circle the whole thing, stay with me. This whole squiggly line of getting worse and worse and worse, they had a metaphor for that. It's a metaphor. It's apocalyptic metaphor. They called this rumors of wars and famines and earthquakes and people, oh my, as the birth pains. Now, some of you here understand what that means. Birth pains, which I hear and understand, are very horrible when they hurt a whole lot, particularly we don't have an epidural. So they hurt a whole lot because it hurts. People stay in labor, pain, and then what happens afterwards? Release, and it's awesome. But what an incredible metaphor. There you go. It's extremely painful. But listen, it's extremely painful, but then there's relief and hope on the other side. And that's a common Jewish and Christian apocalyptic image. And listen to what Jesus says there in verse 8. One more time. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. The shift of the ages, Noel. The shift of the ages between the present evil age and the new age to come. And it's a blurry line. And that's one reason why on this little picture I didn't draw a straight line. It's a blurry line. The ages have shifted a little bit. It shifts a little bit. I think of this a little bit, shift of the ages. When I first worked at First Methodist, before I came on staff, months before, he invited me to come have meetings with him. He knew the name of the woman who's also on staff, not there anymore, to ask my opinion about several things going on in the church. So I came on staff. I came on 2 or 3 different meetings after I got out of school. I'd come over there, and we'd sit in his office. And I would go, and so we'd chat about stuff. And at first, it was kind of weird, like, but I'm not even here yet. But he's like, yeah, you are. I mean, he didn't, if you know Paul, I was like, yeah, you are. He wanted my opinion. So it was cool. So I told him. And it's funny, from then on, and Debbie used to tell me for years, remember that time in your meeting when you said it was about boundaries? My point is, it was a shift. I wasn't fully on staff, but I was kind of on staff already. I was already shaping a little bit some policies they wanted to put into place, but I wasn't fully on staff. It was a shift of responsibilities. It's a blurred line for a while. I didn't get paid for it, but I was in a position kind of already. And that's kind of how it is with apocalyptic literature. Okay, go back to verse 8. All these things are the beginning of birth pains. Verse 9. So there's shift going on. Verse 9. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. So he's telling the Jews, the Jewish disciples, what will happen, and that is exactly what happens. And Gentiles too, they get hurt a lot. And then many will fall away, and that is apostasy. Many will fall away. They will leave the faith. Why? Because they're being persecuted. They will say, forget this junk, and betray one another and hate one another. Like, you made me do it. And many false prophets will rise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. By the way, several times Jesus says that. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. A little Calvinist footnote. Why would Jesus say that if it's not up to you if you're saved or not? Let the logic sink in. Why would Jesus say, for those who endure, it's going to be good for you? Because the standard view of Calvinism is it's not up to you at all. Once you're in forever. And not even just Calvinists, but once you're saved, always saved. Jesus does not believe that. Jesus believes you can change your mind. And I can go to several other places like Mark 4 when he believes that Satan can come and take the gospel right out of a person. The one who endures. He's trying to challenge you and trying to encourage you. Look, people are going to hate you. They're going to try to kill you when that happens. And he says lawlessness. That is, it's going to increase. It's going to get worse and worse. Verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. And many people take that quite literally, that when every people group hears the gospel, it's the end. He's coming back. Verse 15, so when you see the abomination of desolation, which is almost a direct quote from Daniel 9:27 and 11:31 and 12:11. In Daniel 7 through 12, back up a little bit. No, I can't go there right now because there's a lot of background. The point is, it was referring to a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes. He was a Seleucid ruler who came in and destroyed basically the temple. He just gutted it. He sacrificed a pig on the altar. And that caused the Jews a little bit of heartache and the rebellion. And then he set up a bunch of fake priests of his religion all over the place, refused them to circumcise, refused them to read Torah, and finally they had enough. And one guy named Maccabeus, is not his real name, but Maccabeus the Hammer is what they called him. He and some of his kinfolk slaughtered the local fake priest on the altar, not in Jerusalem, another place, and then started a guerrilla warfare. And from 166 or so BC to about 163 BC, they fought a guerrilla warfare and were independent. And then when they came to Jerusalem and they gutted it out, the pagan symbols and whatever, they found the menorah, the candlelight, and the Hanukkah is a celebration of when Judas Maccabeus liberated the temple in 165, 64 BC. That's where that comes from. That's the last time they will be independent until 1947. Depends on when you count. They have a constitution. 1948, they're declared independent, but 47, 48. So that's in Daniel. Jesus uses that image in Daniel to talk about another kind of end-time event, the desolation of sacrilegion. In Daniel, well, not really Daniel, but in Daniel 7 through 12, because 1 through 6 is really ancient, 7 through 12 is pretty modern. There's a document with two major sections. In 7 through 12, that's an almost recent memory. That's basically 150 years ago. He's saying it's like that. When you see that happen, and he even says, spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Now, who's the reader? That is literally the reader of this document to the congregation. Let them understand what he's talking about. Almost certainly because when they go to ask him, probably was it he, what's he talking about? The reader can interpret and understand that because the reader ideally would know what Daniel says too because Daniel could read that too. So that's a telltale sign. These documents were not meant for private consumption in a Bible study. This is public orator and only one reader could read the whole document. Verse 16, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is in the housetop not go down to take what is in the house. Let no one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. You hear the point, it's urgent, right? Verse 19, and alas for women who are pregnant, and those who are nursing, infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. Right? Because you can't run if it's winter, it's usually more rainy or it gets snowy, it's junk. So when the temple has that junk happen again, destruction's coming for you. Hope you're not pregnant, nursing. And the men said, verse 21, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. That's bad news. Again, apocalyptic. Verse 22, and if those days had not been cut short, no human would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will rise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Let that sink in. Figures who do their best to cause people to fall. That image Paul probably uses, when Paul has a similar concept in 2 Thessalonians, he probably uses it from Jesus here. This idea of a false person, this man of lawlessness. Verse 25, look, I've told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he's in the wilderness, don't go out. He's not the Messiah. Listen to that. If a person tells you where to go to find him, don't do it. He says, don't go out there. They say, look, he's in the inner rooms. Don't believe it. They're lying to you. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. It's cosmic in scale. He's not going to be hiding in the desert. When he comes back, he will not be limited to space-time like he was before. Wherever the corpse is, their vultures will gather. Bad news. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. Now, so far, almost certainly he's referring to what became the destruction of the temple in AD 70. Because it did happen. In those days, listen, those after that, verse 29, after that, now all of a sudden it's cosmic. The sun will be darkened. The moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven. The powers of the heavens will be shaken. That is apocalyptic. Like some scholar, I can't remember the person's name, said, the next sentence isn't, and the weather in Palestine will be, it's not a climate prediction. This isn't weather. This isn't El Nino. It's apocalyptic. Then as cosmic will come unraveled. Cosmos will come unraveled. Verse 30, then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now that's straight up from Daniel 7:13. Clouds of heaven. Cloud is a metaphor, and it's almost a pun. Clouds were used in two major ways in the Old Testament. If we had time, we'd look at them all up, but it's two major ways. I'm saving you time. One way cloud is used is to be a metaphor of look up in the sky, you see fluffy, is it cumulus clouds, the fluffy kind? It looks like smoke. And so oftentimes in Ezekiel and other texts, when it speaks of God's judgment, it's like smoke billowing. That is his army's coming, and he's causing chaos as he comes. And so the clouds represent God's judgment. The other way clouds are used are clouds for the heavenly realms. The reason why that's a pun is because, as Jacob knows this, he's Yaakov, is the word Uranus in Greek means heavens. It literally can also be translated sky. And ancient Jews had different understandings of layers of heaven. Some had all the way up to 7 or 10. But it seems to be a typical one seems to have been 3 layers of heaven. The first layer of heaven might say us in this atmosphere. 2 is up really, really high, the top of mountains and so forth. The third heaven is the highest realms where the gods lived. And Jews held a similar view about God himself. This matters in a little bit when we get to 1 Thessalonians, so stay with me. So when God is up in the highest heavens, if he comes to the second heavens, that's up really, really high too. Like, again, top of mountains where birds way, way up there. So when they talk about the clouds of heaven, it's the pun because they also believed that gods could live in the second realm sometimes too. In the ancient world, this is a very old idea. The gods lived on the mountains. That's why Mount Olympus, where Zeus lived, they thought he literally lived on the top of the mountain. They couldn't climb up there. And so when the clouds touched the top of the mountain and they heard thundering and lightning, they're up there doing stuff. It's no surprise that the ancient Hebrews had also Yahweh's mountain, which is what? Mount Sinai. Or another text in Deuteronomy, Mount Horeb, but it's probably Mount Sinai. And there, when Moses is chilling out with the sheep as a shepherd, no Hebrew hears that text and goes, what in the world? He met God on a mountain? They all go, of course. It's standard fare for the gods to be near or associated with a mountain. Okay, so the clouds of heaven represents the divine realm. The divine realm. We don't have to think literally he's coming through the cumulus clouds, but it's the divine realm. And that's why it's power and great glory. Again, the divine realm. You're going to hear sermons and lessons and Bible studies, and some people actually think Jesus won't freeze to death because he's special. He's like Superman. So when he comes to the cumulus, it's different. I mean, I had a professor one time say, I couldn't. Okay, anyway, it's apocalyptic imagery of the divine realm. They're saying it's like the clouds up there because it's up high. But in this case, it could be one of judgment. It could be one just in the divine realm itself. And I don't care either one. You pick your mind, whatever. Verse 31, standard Jewish apocalyptic. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call. They send out the angels in Jewish apocalyptic literature because it's to get the dead. The assumption throughout many, many Jewish texts is that angels gather the dead. A little footnote, what's so interesting is when you read modern stories about people who die and come back, a very common thread through the narrative around the world, regardless of religious background, is when they die, angelic beings are right there beside them. Now, technically, they're not angels. Angels a messenger, but they're spiritual beings. They'll call them angels. And they'll say, we didn't talk, but I knew they were there to help me. And I felt very peaceful. That's interesting, but that's standard Jewish theology, that when you die, angels, here he's saying when that judgment day comes, he's sending out the angels to grab his people with a loud trumpet call. That's also standard Jewish apocalyptic imagery because they use the shofar, the horn they would use, that horn was for battle or war. It was also used to make a big announcement or to gather the assembly. And apocalyptic authors use that actual literal horn and threw it into a metaphor and say, it's going to be that at the end of time. God's going to blow his trumpets, not just like we do at Sabbath or like at the temple. It's going to be like that at the end of time, but it's going to be cosmic. You're going to hear the trumpets blow everywhere. Everyone's going to hear it, and that means, like it was back then, before a battle, it's end of time. The shift of the ages has come. And the angels will gather his elect from the four winds, northeast, southwest, four corners of the earth kind of thing, and from one end of heaven to the other. That is, just the cosmos will be collected. Human souls will be collected. Okay, that's a quick nutshell of what Jesus says there. Now, can I go ahead? Go ahead. We're going to 1 Thessalonians 4. Yes, sir.
I feel like you're skipping the hard part, which comes in the next few verses, and it says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place."
That's not my Bible. No. Yeah, truly this generation will not pass away until, read it. Until what? That's
Truly
right.
I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place.
I think it's safe to say there are three standard views in scholarship of what to do with that. One is he was wrong. Now, that's not a majority view, but it was a majority view for a long time. I mean, Reimarus back in the late 1700s, Schweitzer. Today, Bart Ehrman is that way. He said it. He's just wrong. Jesus is wrong. And a subset might be, well, Matthew's wrong. So someone's wrong. That's one view. And some scholars say, well, he was just mistaken. Doesn't mean you can't trust the Bible. Just, he's caught up in the moment or whatever. I don't think that's very likely for a lot of reasons, but I don't think it's very likely. So I don't find that view. But that is a view. A second major view is that what Jesus has in mind is the destruction of the temple. It's everything before what he calls tribulation has to do with an actual temple and so forth, like it did in Daniel's time. Well, the book of Daniel, okay, whoever wrote Daniel 7 to 12, that he has that in mind. And that, so though it says all, the all references that. Now, I can send you some commentaries who I think persuasively argue that because the way Matthew is taking Mark's material, when Matthew rearranged Mark's material and put that statement so late, that's what causes confusion. It sounds like all means everything he just said. But if you take Mark's reading, it makes more sense that that's what he's talking about. I find that more compelling. Not just because I don't think I have a problem with Jesus making a mistake on this issue. That is, I'm not trying to hold his integrity because I don't have to defend anybody. I think the most compelling evidence is that Jesus did say that, and I think he meant it about the destruction of the temple. I'm trying to remember what the third one was. That was the other one. Is that some people say generation means all kinds of different things. I don't find that, I'm just telling you my view, my opinion on top of all these. The third one, that generational issue, I don't find that compelling because the word generation almost always means, in general, a generation. It doesn't always. And you might say about 40 years, 40, 50 years. Well, we just, a parent-to-child relationship kind of thing. So that's it. What's so interesting, now there's more there, but only because I want to move on. I don't find myself, I used to be a little bothered by that text. Did he mean all of it and the generation passed away? My own personal view is, you didn't ask, can I add this part of it? you didn't ask me. My own personal view is that at least Jesus was referring to the destruction of the temple. That this generation will pass away, and he meant that. And they won't pass away before these things happen. At minimum, it means that. At most, the early Christians interpreted what he said to think it meant in their own time. There was a fervor that they thought maybe was implied by what Jesus said, which I understand, and then they were mistaken. I find that also a pretty compelling case too. So I tend to find those two things. Those 2 points. Okay. What I find comforting is the early Christians, and I used to have a problem with this until it dawned on me, the early Christians sure don't seem to have a problem with this statement. I mean, it's in Matthew this way. The only reference at all we get to the idea of possibly the implication that Christians had a problem with Jesus' delay is later on in 1-2 Peter, when it says to him it's like 1,000 years and so forth. That seems to imply that their community was struggling with, why isn't he back yet? But that's all. So if they're not as bothered, I don't want to be that bothered either. So that's the best I got.
I mean, I think that's a related question that maybe will be a thread throughout this study, is like how the first century church responded to this, because Jesus definitely talks about, not just here, but in other places, about this is urgent. And he gives the analogies about trimming your wicks and kingdom of God is
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jesus himself is responsible for creating urgency. That's exactly right. I asked, there's a man, in fact, he just recently died. He's a very well-respected New Testament British scholar named I. Howard Marshall. And I had the privilege of meeting him at my master's degree, and he gave these lectures, and it was real cool to meet him. And anyway, at his presentation, on whatever night it was, and 100, 200-300 people there, and I asked him that question, basically a similar question. I said, Professor Marshall, because you don't call him doctor, you call him professor, because that's a higher rank. But anyway, Professor Marshall, what do you do with the delay? Okay, I'm not trying to be nerdy. What do you do with the delay of parousia? That's in scholarship. What do you do with the delay of parousia and Jesus' sense of urgency and his parabolic statements and other things? And he goes, yeah, of course. I mean, that's a common issue. So he goes, yeah, he kind of grinned. He goes, I know. He said, the way I like to say it is, it's as if there's a chasm. Of course, he's standing up when he's teaching, and he says, as if there's a chasm, and I walk up right to the edge, and I could show on the rug here. I'll show it. So I walk right up to the edge, and then I turn. So if I'm walking on the edge of the chasm, he said, it is true that at any moment, I could fall in or the end could come. So time is still going on, but I am right on the verge. And I've always thought about that image, and I thought that seems pretty compelling to me. It fits, I think, Paul's teaching very well. Now, the question then is, and this is where scholars, oh my goodness, debate, and they debate about everything, but most things, not about Jesus' existence. But then the issue is that the best way? Or for example, did Paul really think in his own lifetime that it was going to happen? If I were a betting guy, I think he did. But that doesn't mean Jesus made him think that. You see the distinction there? And that's where it depends. He does later. Yeah, he does there. Jesus said, "Even the Son of Man doesn't know the hour." That's right, and that's why. Yeah, that's right. And that's another thing why, like generational before this generation, I don't find that. I just don't find it very compelling that he would say those things and mean all of this, including the end of sun and moon. But I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how to reconcile. So one of those statements doesn't mean what I think it means, and that's why I tend to go, I think he meant the temple's going to happen before. There we go. But people do get different answers, and that's for sure. Some people get very bothered, and that's the end of their faith, and he can't make them. Oh my goodness, I don't see why I get that bothered about it, but that's my view. And very good question. That's on the fly, that's the best I got. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 is a very different text. Paul is writing to the church at Thessaloniki. If you're from the south, you say Thessalonica. But he's writing to Thessaloniki, and this is probably, but not certainly, his very first document. If someone asks you on the streets, and I know they do all the time, Jamie, what's the earliest Christian text there is? You would say the earliest one we have is probably one of two documents, either Galatians or 1 or 1 Thessalonians. And it was written probably around AD 50. Galatians 49 or 50, 51. So this is right around AD 50, 51. This is probably, if you had to pick, most scholars say this is the very first one. Let that sink. It's pretty cool when you think about it, at least for me. I like history. So this is probably, or maybe, the most ancient Christian text in the world. And you get to read it all the time in English for free. And when Paul started a church there at Thessaloniki, We learn from the book of Acts. He goes there, and he teaches them all kinds of stuff, starts a church, and then moves on. When he moves on, almost certainly, he talks about Jesus being the Lord, being the King, and Jesus being and returning. Well, probably because of Paul's urgency, and Jesus is going to come back, get ready. We're not exactly sure what he said. But what's happened is the church at Thessalonica, some of their loved ones who are Christians have died. And they write to Paul and say, what the heck? Jesus hasn't returned yet. You said he's coming back. So Paul writes on several issues, and one of them, some like prostitution and a bunch of stuff, but one of the issues is, what do you do with the fact that this delay of the parousia? He's not back yet. And 1 Thessalonians 4:13 is a classic text to go to. I use this often when I preach funeral services. And it's the only text, it's the main text dispensationalists will go to support what they think is rapture theology. That's why I'm covering this text, so you hear a little more of it. Verse 13. But we don't want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who are asleep. That's a standard way of saying dead. They're asleep because they look like they're asleep, right? They're still. That you may not grieve as others who do not have any hope, or those who do have no hope. Now, it's standard Greco-Roman belief that when you die, that it is hopeless. It is hopeless. It's very common on epitaphs to say, like, I was, I am no more. Who cares? Or I care not. I mean, there'd just be some really depressing epitaphs all over the place. But here, the ancient philosophers did try to comfort people sometime, but a lot of people weren't comforted by that. And Paul's saying, we don't want you to grieve like they do who have no hope. Some New Testament scholars think that Paul's saying, don't grieve. Don't grieve like them. Don't grieve at all. That is, they have no hope. You don't have any business grieving. That's probably a minority. The majority of New Testament scholars read this as, don't grieve like those people who have no hope. Instead, grieve like people who do have a hope. So the first option is, you don't have permission to grieve. What are you thinking? You're a Christian. The second option is, you do have permission to grieve, but you have grief with hope. There you go. There you go. So you make up your own mind what you want to do with that. I think the second option is more compelling. Verse 14, for since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. Verse 15, listen here carefully. For this we declare to you by a word from the Lord. Now, a word from the Lord means like a prophetic utterance, or it means a teaching from Jesus. I tend to think, many people think, it tends to be a teaching from Jesus. A word from the Lord does not mean the Bible. It's not, okay? Teaching from Jesus passed down. That we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, what's the word for coming there? Huh? Say it with passion. Yeah, parousia. Parousion is the accusative case, but that's right. The coming parousia of the Lord. Not the rapture of the Lord, but the parousia of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. One more time. If you're alive, you're not going to beat them to the punch. Verse 16, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with the cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Now, in Greek, it can be the dead in Christ will rise first, or the dead will rise first in Christ. It can be the genitive case there can be different. We're not exactly sure which one. Now, let me pause there for a second. Standard Jewish apocalyptic imagery is that Michael, there's only two named angels in the entire Bible, Michael and Gabriel. And Michael leads the army's host, the angelic host. He's the main 4-star general. He's the main dude. And he will take his archangels, he'll blow the trumpet and start it. Here, Paul's using that exact Jewish imagery, and it's not Michael's who's leading the army, it is Jesus. And that's why he says, with the voice of an archangel. He's just almost taken the exact sentence out of standard Jewish apocalyptic imagery and just put the word Jesus instead of Michael. In other words, not even Michael, Jesus himself will lead the return and the trumpet. And with the sound of the trumpet, the dead, and I think it should be translated, the dead in Christ, the dead in the Messiah will rise first. If you want to say Christians, I'm fine with that. The dead in Christ will rise first. Then, it's the then, we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds. The clouds does not mean clouds. It doesn't mean in the sky. It's an apocalyptic image of the heavenly realm. We'll be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. I know it says air, because air is where the heavenly realm is. It's almost a pun. So we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Now, there's a lot of things going on, and I'm not going to unpack every word of this, but to make it very clear, when you look up the terms, stay with me, when you look up the terms of return, like in verse, the parousia, the coming in verse 15 and verse 16, will descend from heaven with a cry and command. These images of return and coming fit very well into a particular type of narrative Greeks and Romans, particularly Romans, used. It's fascinating. And it's when they talked about emperors or rulers coming to town. So it's virtually unanimous amongst New Testament scholarship that what Paul is using is a very common Roman imagery of royalty coming to town. And when royalty comes to town in the ancient world, like today, who goes to meet them? Is it us? No. If the president came to town, they don't send me. They send ambassadors. They send the governor. They send the mayor. They send all the rich people who load up and go meet him at the airport. Right? And they send them out. That's precisely in the ancient world. Romans did the same thing. When the emperor came to town or the main ruler came to town, all the elite, the equestrian class and other senatorial class would go meet him and then come. That's exactly what Paul is doing here. The Lord, in verse 16, one more time, just read it carefully, because it's so hard sometimes to get rid of all this rapture theology. The Lord is doing what from heaven? He's what? Verse 16? You can read it. Don't be scared. He's descending from the heavenly realms to do what? To meet us. We rise, the dead in Christ, rise to meet him as he is doing what? One more time? Is descending. Jewish apocalyptic theology is that he comes down and recreates. He does not descend to take away. He descends to come to establish the Messianic kingdom. So the hope and the encouragement Paul is giving is that, look, your dead aunts and uncles, those who have fallen asleep, the ones that accepted Jesus last time I was in Thessaloniki, don't worry. When Jesus returns, they're going to be in the front of the line, Noel. In fact, the dead ones are going to rise up first. They're going to meet him when he's coming. And then the rest of us are going to meet him together. And that's when the new cosmos gets made brand new. It's a hopeful image. He hadn't forgot them. They're going to be first in line. They're the VIPs. They're the royal emissaries that meet the royalty when he comes into town. Then we all meet with him, as it were, in the clouds of heaven, in the heavenly realm. We all get united together. And that's it. He doesn't unpack up. Now, in 1 Corinthians 15, if we had time, and we're choosing not to, he talks about it all happening in the twinkling of an eye. And other times he says it happens like a thief in the night. You just don't know what's going to happen. It's going to, boom. It's that fast. It's that fast. Paul believed that when he's revealed, in Ephesians and Colossians, when he's revealed, it's all of a sudden, cosmic change. It is not a long, drawn-out process where he meets the world's leaders and he has TV broadcasts and he undoes all the marks of the beast and he does none of that stuff. It's a cosmic change all of a sudden. In 1 Thessalonians. And then, keep going, chapter 5, verse 1. Remember, there's no chapter and verses when Paul wrote this. It's still one theme, one idea. Chapter 5, verse 1, he says, now concerning the times and the seasons, and that means apocalyptic end times. Because they're worried about that. Brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you. That's a good hopeful. You know this already. That's Paul's point. You know this. Verse 2. For you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord, you know that now because you're now apocalyptic experts, that day of the Lord comes from? Anybody? I'm getting embarrassed on my podcast. No one's listening to anything I'm saying. The day of the Lord comes from Yom Adonai. It comes from the prophets. It comes from prophets. That's Jewish. It will come like a thief in the night. That is, you're not going to be stinking aware of it. Thieves don't let you know they're coming. That means you can't know when it's going to happen. It's like a thief in the night. Verse 3, while people are saying there's peace and security. Oh, we're cool, Paul. Then sudden destruction. That's straight up from Amos. I mean, if you read your Amos, that's so prophetic. Then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains, like what Jesus said in Matthew 24, come upon a pregnant woman and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers. That's apocalyptic. That is, you're not ignorant, you're not evil. Doesn't mean you're not literally at nighttime. For that day to surprise you like a thief, for you are all children of light, children of the day. We're not of the night or of the darkness. Let us not sleep as others do, but keep awake and be sober. those who sleep, and he goes on for a while. And that sounds like Romans chapter 12. Remember in Romans 12? And he says, the day is at hand, the night is far behind. So let us act as if the day has begun. We did that in Romans 12. That's good old Pauline stuff. And here he's saying, of course, you're going to be aware when it happens, when you see him. He's not going to hit you. I mean, a thief is not a good guy. It's going to be surprising, but that's going to steal from you. You're children of the light. You're not going to be stolen from. You're going to rise to meet him in the air with your dead loved ones. It's going to be good news.
When they say sleep, I think they're talking about sleep. We're continuing to do this. But is that the same word as sleep when they talk about the day?
Yeah, the same word of sleep, yeah.
People just knew, like,
Yeah.
if we used a different word.
That's right. Just a metaphor, yeah, because they look like they were asleep. And very quickly, in 2 Thessalonians, Paul's encouragement seems to cause more confusion. Bless his heart. Because now they think it's already happened. And remember, if you're a Greek or Roman person, those that did believe, and this kind of, some could believe in that kind of cosmic experience. That's a mouthful, and I won't unpack that. But it would not have been bizarre for them to think, oh, it's already happened. And so Paul has to tell them in 2 Thessalonians, no, the resurrection has not taken place yet. Now, we don't have, so maybe that's your homework. Read 2 Thessalonians. He says, it hasn't happened yet. No, and he starts giving them, he unpacks more. What he really does is he goes to his standard Jewish apocalyptic image or bag of tricks, and he pulls them out, and he says, no, don't you remember? The trumpet's got to be blown. The man of lawlessness has to come. Apostasy still has to take place. And that's from Matthew chapter 24, probably. No, sorry. Delete. Matthew wasn't written yet. It probably comes from the statements of Jesus that later got recorded into Matthew 24. Okay, to be technical speaking. That word from the Lord. So Paul unpacks more and says, no. You know these things have to happen first. The birth pangs have to be rebellion and lawlessness and mean bad leaders and so forth. And that's just standard fare.
Paul writes his letter to correct the error and also to encourage those believers whose faith is being tested by the difficulties presented by persecution.
Yeah, in 1 Thessalonians, it's that standard scholarship to believe that he's encouraging them in what we call...
This is 2 Thessalonians.
Oh, okay.
But
Gotcha.
Isn't he concerned about
He's concerned.
apostasy
Well,
here?
it's the same community at Thessaloniki. So it's the same community in both letters. And they probably were under some degree of persecution. The problem is the dating. Like Caligula just died. This is in the time around Claudius. So Claudius, he's not very favorable of Christians. But what we call a pogrom is an official declaration of go kill all the Christians. That hasn't happened yet at all. So it is possible that there's some harassing they've received. But as far as official messing with them all the time, that's very unlikely. But some persecution, yeah. But I don't push that too far.
Saying here, that's why.
I want to stop there if I can, because we're good around on time. Are there any questions or comments about that for me? We actually covered all the stuff I wanted to, which is good. Any questions about that? Again, there are good readable books about what I've covered tonight that I can recommend to you. I can. They're easy to read, I think, about kind of end times overview, and they're fun. So I can be happy to recommend them. Let me know. And we can cover, because I know this is a little fast and furious when it comes to new concepts. But in Revelation, this handout with the outline at the top, you see that outline? Obviously in my hands, but I put a little picture there. This outline comes from Charles Talbert. Have y'all ordered that book at all, the commentary? All right, well, if you're going to do it, you still got a little bit of time. And this outline is straight up Talbert. I got this in class, actually. I mean, I edited a whole lot of it and retyped it. But the outline's from Talbert. In my view, I think it's the best outline of Revelation available. And I need to clarify one thing. Last week, I might have given a little bit of, misled you a little bit on the picture. Last week, I said there are two dominant ways to read Revelation. One is when you don't care so much about historical context, and you make up your own system. You pick and choose which text that comes from Isaiah. This means this means this. And then you have contemporary figures. This is like Hitler. That's what dispensationalists, and I said that's the dominant way to read it. And I think that's still true. I said the second major way, what scholars do, which is to read historical context and genre. I don't want to be misleading at all and make it sound as if, and scholars all agree. They don't all agree. What they all agree upon is that it must be read as apocalyptic genre and historical context. That they all concur. what every single image means or every metaphor evokes, they don't agree on every single point, and that's okay. So, an effort not to make this a year-long course of everything, that's why I'm only choosing one commentary that I'm recommending, because I think he has the best one, but he's not the only one. So I want to make sure. Last week I was listening to my podcast, I want to be clear about that. So this is Talbert's outline, and these first points about authorship, location, and so forth are there. So there we go. Any questions at all? We'll wrap up. And this is wrap up. I'm done. Yes, ma'am.
I understand you, David. Our lesson tonight is to get us well grounded and to understand, to look at the scriptures that we know, but we haven't really looked for apocalyptic messages in that. To be aware that, you know, Matthew and Mark are, that there are apocalyptic scriptures.
Yes, ma'am. I don't want to assume you haven't thought of apocalyptic literature. Maybe you have. In my experience, most people haven't. I didn't until I learned it.
I haven't thought about looking for it.
Right. And
In
that's
the Gospels, you know, that
exactly.
I'm so familiar with.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, in Sunday school, we did do Revelation, and we talked about 4 views: the futuristic, the historistic, all of this.
Yeah.
And I think I heard it said that probably most of us have a mixture.
Yeah, that's probably true.
I like history, and I believe in having a map beside me when I'm reading the
Right,
Bible.
right.
Because I like to know what's going on in general in that known
Right.
world
Good.
at the time. To
Good.
help me understand what the theology and the history is.
Right. I think that's great. My own view is that Revelation is best understood as a combination of those views.
Okay.
I don't think any one view fits it well, and I think I will demonstrate that in Revelation. I think
That's what I decided.
I think I'll make a compelling case that to go, I'm just a blank. You've misread the text already, and I think I can demonstrate that. So yeah, my goal tonight is to try to get us thinking apocalyptically, and see that it's in Mark 13, Matthew 24, and Luke, I think 21. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have these sections. Some one in Thessalonians. And so Paul can say, stop going to the temple, stop going to the prostitutes, and he'll just talk about the end of times. He can just switch the subject like that and go apocalyptic all of a sudden, and then go back to regular prose. And we can go to other texts we're not going to now, but there are many other places in the New Testament where it's apocalyptic in nature. And I'm trying to get us to think that way. So, and this is very brief, when to Revelation, it won't sound that strange. You're going to hear rumors of wars and famines, and you're going to hear all this again. You'll hear it, and that'll be cool. So that's my hope. Now you're apocalyptic scholars. Thank you so much for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. If you want to listen to more, go to my website, davidpendergrass.com, and look at one of the tabs that says podcast. If you click that, it'll take you straight to my podcast on iTunes, or you can search for it on iTunes if you want to, A Glimpse of the Kingdom. But also on my website, you'll see another way to get, if you're an Android listener on your phone or you just don't use Mac computers. Again, davidpendergrass.com, and click podcast. It'll take you exactly where you need to go, and you can subscribe from there and get this as often as you like, and also see my blogs and so forth. If you want to get me to come to your organization or church, otherwise to do some consulting, you need to go to davidpendergrassconsulting.com. davidpendergrassconsulting.com. You'll see the information there. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, you can find me at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass.